Hello and welcome to The Agenda on Labour Social. Tonight I'm delighted to be joined by Katy Montgomerie, who is an LGBT advocate and also radical feminist. Great to have you with us, Katy. Why are we talking this week in particular? What's going on?
So the Equality and Human Rights Commission in the UK, the EHRC, which is basically the government's human rights organisation, the main one in the country, has decided that it wants the government to remove trans people's legal protections from the Equality Act 2010. And if they got their way, so this is just a proposal at the moment, but if they got their way, it would ban people like me from public spaces. Essentially, I wouldn't be able to go to the toilet or to the gym or to the swimming pool or, to women's clubs and that kind of thing. And it would take away my protections from misogyny at work and in other situations where you might need the law to back you up. So it's really serious. It's quite a big deal. The current government is obviously very anti-trans because it's like a far right, even for the Tories government. And so there's a chance this might get shoehorned through, and in which case it's just going to straight up ruin the lives of every trans person in the country. So I presume that's what you had me on to talk about.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I haven't watched the latest episode of The Mandalorian, so let's talk about this instead. So how did this come about? I mean, how did the Equalities and Human Rights Commission suddenly decide to come down on the side of transphobia? Like, where did this originate?
Right. So the Equality and Human Rights Commission actually used to be pro-LGBT rights until quite recently. They regularly wrote opinions in favour of trans rights, and they wrote advice on how businesses can keep with the law and all this kind of stuff. And then the Boris Johnson government got in power, and they replaced all of the people in charge with like right-wing stooges. And ever since then, like, they put in a gender critical activist basically to be in charge. And the gender critical is just like the politically correct term for transphobic.
Oh my God.
So it's just like a shell organization now. It's been like condemned and disavowed by every single major LGBT rights organization in the country. So it's just kind of shit, really.
So they've done this with Ofcom, haven't they? Putting their own people in. At the BBC, they've done it. Ofsted, they've done it as well. It's like their old school chums they've put in charge of all these major...
of course. Or political donors.
Yeah, political donors. But these affect the lives of so many people. So what is it about the the Equalities Act of 2010 that now they want to take away? I mean, is this going to affect trans women, trans men as much as trans women, or is this just specifically targeted at trans women?
So I guess there's two parts to this. There's one, which is what they're saying they want it to do. And then there's two, what it'll actually do. They're basically all of their like decent, well, I don't know how many they had to start, but a lot of their legal experts and legal directors have quit over the fiasco of trans rights and LGBT rights and the kind of crumbling reputation of the EHRC. So the people they got in charge now aren't just hateful, but also very incompetent. So they've kind of written this letter saying, these are the changes we make and this is what they're going to do. And they haven't really got it right. But what they're aiming to do is effectively count all trans women as men and all trans men as women in every aspect of law and restrict any kind of protections they get from that. And maybe if you've never encountered a trans person before, you might be like, oh, it sounds kind of common sense, it sounds straightforward. But the reality is, whether you think I'm a woman or a man or like an alien or anything, it literally doesn't, I don't care what you believe, even if it's stupid, because I still face misogynistic sexism when I go out into the world. And the law should be there to protect everyone who faces misogynistic sexism from that. That's like the whole point in it. And the way they've written this letter, they've said things like, oh, well, we expect, up until today, a trans woman in this situation might be able to get protection from the law. And we don't want that to happen anymore. That's basically what they've said. However, the Equalities Act is actually quite well written. I mean, it was brought in by Tony Blair's government, I think. And they spent ages on it, and it was quite a big deal. It's kind of one of their crowning achievements. And it does actually protect people based on perceptions. So if someone was like, if a random straight man is walking down the street and some thugs decide that he's gay and beat him up because of it, he could still get protection, like in UK law, not necessarily just in the Equality Act, but in general, based on the fact that they thought he was gay. And it's the same in the workplace. If your boss fires you because he thinks you're gay, it doesn't actually matter if you're not. It's the point is that he thought you were. So the law ideally should cover trans women regardless of whether this change happens, but the EHRC have made it quite clear that they intend for it not to. So,
but that's crazy, isn't it? Because the other protected categories, like religion, is not on your birth certificate. Your skin color is not on your birth certificate. Your sexual orientation is not on your birth certificate. So how this feels like they are targeting trans people, which is wasn't this exactly what Lee Anderson said they were going to do accidentally a couple of months ago? He said the quiet bit out loud. He said, we haven't got Boris and Brexit anymore, so we're going to have a go at refugees and trans people.
It's just completely ridiculous. I mean, it is just targeting trans people, and they made that quite clear by working with all these anti-trans hate groups that only focus on trans people. I mean, this is quite unambiguously just anti-trans, and it's not one of these things where you could argue that maybe this affects cis women or cis men. So cis just means not trans. Affects people who aren't trans too. But I mean, it's just unambiguously doesn't. Banning me from the toilets isn't going to affect anyone apart from me. If I banned you from the toilets, maybe if I was someone who was like, I find anyone who wears a red hat, morally repulsive, then you could argue that my life is better because of that. But it's not a real meaningful difference. If you find trans people disgusting, you might find it good that we're banned from public spaces, but it doesn't materially benefit you. It's not a real problem. Whereas me being banned from public spaces is a real problem for me.
Isn't this just opening the door, though, for more misogyny towards not just trans women, but also cisgender women who don't look traditionally feminine?
Right. I mean
there's already stories, isn't there, of cisgender women in toilets being attacked because they don't look feminine enough.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was so North Carolina tried something similar to this in the USA, which they did their kind of bathroom bill, which is where they try and ban trans people from using public spaces. And that doesn't really result in anything apart from women being harassed because, it tells the public that, if you see someone that you think looks wrong, then you should challenge them. And challenging them could be anything from saying, are you in the right bathroom, to, getting your husband or group of male mates or whatever to come and drag this poor woman who's got short hair or something out of the toilet. And that is the result of lots of it. And, that's one of the many problems with these proposals is how are they going to enforce it? Every single document I own has an F on it. I mean, anyone can make up their own opinion about how I look, but the reality is people don't comment on me being trans in my everyday life. And that's true for loads of trans people, most of us really. So all that's going to happen is, I mean, like today, I don't know if you are addicted to Twitter like I am, but
I'm trying to cut down. I'm trying to go cold turkey since Musk took over.
Impossible. One of the memes of today that's been going on is some gender critical activist who saw a picture of Daniel Radcliffe, who played Harry Potter, and his wife. His wife, who is pregnant.
Who's pregnant, right?
And she was like, looks like a trans woman. No, disgusting. No wonder he supports trans people.
Oh my
God. Like, if she's obviously incredibly beautiful. Like, Daniel Radcliffe is obviously a very attractive man. And, just look at those couple and just be like, they're trans. It just shows, they could target anyone. If you don't meet some ridiculous beauty standard, what happens when they decide you or your sister or something is a man in disguise? Then it's scary stuff.
This is it. I mean, it's not helping anybody. And it's setting the cause of feminism back by people who think, honestly, they do believe that they are feminists, and all they're doing is making
some of them
most women's lives harder. But no, some of them are just evil. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but
They convince themselves they're goodies. You know, the terrorists on 9/11, they didn't think they were the bad guys. They thought that they thought they were doing the right thing. You know, the Nazis thought they were doing the right thing, which is terrifying and just very human at the same time. And like now, you got all these people who are. It's mad to me. What I think about is the fact that 12 years ago, no one cared about the EU. No one put it in their top list of things that were priorities in life. It was things like housing, crime, education, infrastructure, the NHS. They were all in people's top threes. No one cared about the EU. And then suddenly along came Rupert Murdoch and Lord Rothermere, and they went, everyone should care about the EU now. And Nigel Farage. And we did, because it was in the news every freaking day. And now that's gone. Boris Johnson's gone, hopefully, touch wood. All they've got left now is, refugees, trans people. And it's like something that wasn't a problem. And they make it into a problem and then pretend they're going to solve it. But you're caught right in the middle of this because this is going to turn your life upside down.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of already has. Because I'm still hoping that this won't pass. They've only got like 1 year or something till the next election. And it's a hugely complicated legal process. And if they can't do it properly, but it's going to be challenged in courts, it's going to be challenged in Parliament. I'm hoping it's not going to pass. But the fact that it might is so oppressive and like terrifying that, like, genuinely, I mean, no exaggeration at all. This week I have, since they announced it, been planning what my options are to leave the country, because I mean, how could I live here if I was banned from using public spaces? And, you know, there are some trans people who are able to, it's called living stealth, kind of, if you pass as a man or a woman in life without people thinking you're trans. And there are people who live like that who might not be affected by this. But if you're either a loud knobhead like me, or if you, still have all your old friends and family, or people at your work know, or if you don't pass, then this is going to affect you. And it could just stop you living your life. So I know, so many people have messaged me saying they don't know what to do and they're considering leaving the country. I know people have already left the country just over the trans rights attacks that this country has already had. So, yeah, I mean, it's proper grim.
It is. And, for the life of me, I don't get it. It feels like we've gone backwards so badly. I grew up in the 80s. So when I was a kid, you weren't allowed to talk about being gay in school. It was not allowed. You had Clause 28. And basically, if you thought you were gay, there was no one to talk about it with, save maybe your parents, who probably wouldn't understand, or your peers, in which case you will get bullied. You will get bullied.
Yeah.
And there was no protection in place because it was technically kind of okay to bully someone for being gay. At the same time, it wasn't okay to bully someone from being from a different ethnic minority or a different religion, but it was seen to be, you can, and everything. When I was a kid, like, everything was gay. And also...
Oh, yeah, me too. That was in the 90s and even into the 2000s.
Everything was gay. If it was bad or a bit rubbish, it was gay. And then also, growing up in the 80s as well as a little kid, I remember people saying that gay people shouldn't be allowed to use the bathrooms for exactly the same reasons that people are saying about trans people now. It's like, so we don't have a presumption of innocence for trans people. Really?
Well,
is that
not
where you want
according
to
to J.K. Rowling. That's one thing she said in her article, isn't it? She said no one group should be given the presumption of innocence. Like, what are you talking about? There is one group, actually, that I think shouldn't be given the presumption of innocence, and that's billionaires.
Yes.
But every other group should be given the presumption of innocence.
Exactly. And it worries. I don't know if I'm sort of worried about the future, but also I'm absolutely flabbergasted by some of the people who were normally on our side and the EU debate, things like that. And Graham Linehan, who wrote Father Ted, one of my favourite sitcoms, and they've just gone mad. Graham Linehan's lost his whole family because he just wants to stay on Twitter at 3 a.m. going, I don't like trans people.
He is not the only one. He's not the only one. He's just the most prominent one. But every now and then, I actually did a video about it a while ago, which you can check out my channel. They had this thing called Vigil for the Lost, where they got gender critical people to write in and say what they'd lost in their lives because this was their new life. And people were like, I've had a divorce, and my grandchildren don't speak to me, and all this. And there's pages and pages of this stuff. People being like, oh, every single one of my friends has stopped talking to me. And it's just like, I remember just when I was first coming out and like reading stuff from other trans people on the internet, something I read was they're like, oh, it's this old kind of adage of trans people is once you post transphobia, you're never the same again and you never stop. And it's true, like these people, no one, whenever you click on their profile, whatever social media network, if they've said something transphobic to you and you go on, it seems that all they talk about is transphobia. Like they don't have any, like even they talk about trans people more than I do. And I'm like a campaigner for trans rights. And this is incredible.
It's like they've got no other hobbies. The one that maddens me the most is J.K. Rowling, because she's the richest author in the world. And if I was that rich, I would find a beach somewhere and I would just sit pina coladas on the beach, on a hammock, by the beach, and just live in the sun and just have a lovely time with me friends and family all around me. That's what I would do. I would create a little heaven on earth, as the song goes. Why is she in her castle in Scotland tweeting away about,
so pathetic.
And also, if it was a politician or, Graham Linehan, for instance, I don't think it's had the same impact, because loads of kids followed J.K. Rowling. Because she used to post things like, oh, look, here's a lovely picture of Harry Potter that somebody sent me.
Well, she used to be normal, didn't she? So.
And then one day she woke up and she went, I'm going to talk about women got our penises. And it's like little kids scrolling on the mum's Twitter. Mummy, what does penis mean? And it's like, what are you doing? What?
She actually, did you see she actually posted something like that literally directly to a child? Because she was holding this competition for, you've got to draw the Ichabod, which is some monster she made up. And kids were, like 5-year-olds and stuff were drawing their little pictures and having them tweeted in by the parents or whatever, and like teenagers. And she replied to some poor kid saying, oh, this is an excellent drawing, by the way, Timmy. And then had half of like a sentence pasted afterwards saying, and then this trans rights activist wanted to fuck some turfs up.
Oh my God.
In the same sentence. And it was up for like an hour before she deleted it.
Why?
That's crazy.
Why?
I don't know.
And then again, like someone like her who has gone out of her way to sound androgynous in her author name, and then gone on one step further and given herself a man's name with Robert Galbraith, who was a doctor who did gay conversion, didn't he, or something mad like that? But, yeah. But like, and she's like, oh, you can't get ahead unless you're a man in publishing, and I'm like, you're writing children's books, so Enid Blyton couldn't get ahead. I'm sorry, what? It just seemed like really a weird excuse to use. And it makes me think that like there's something gone wrong at some point with J.K. Rowling, and it's.
I think like to address that argument like head on, there is definitely something to. I mean, in lots of fields, if you're a woman, you are disadvantaged in the field, and it's kind of why we have things like writing prizes for women. You don't really have like men's writing prizes, we do for women.
Yeah.
But in her addressing that and like you say, picking a man's name, I think it's reasonable. If you genuinely in a position where the publisher says, oh, we won't publish you unless you're a man, picking a man's name is a fine survival like thing to do. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
But unless you're picking the name of a conversion therapist, it's a little bit sus.
Yeah, that is a bit weird. And she was already the richest author in the world at that point when she decided to call herself Robert Galbraith.
But also, in that sense, what she's doing is acknowledging that this sexism is based on perception. So she's saying, if I wrote with a man's name, then people read me more charitably. And if that's true, then the fact that a trans woman with a woman's name writes something will be judged the same way that she would have been if she wrote with a woman's name, then that shows that the perception is the issue. And that means that trans women should be included in women's prizes. Then, like, for writing and stuff, which is something she's opposed to. So yeah, there's definitely hypocrisy there.
And it's really sad. And also, I mean, like with the EU, it was something that I never thought about it. If someone came out as trans, the Wachowskis who did the Matrix films, they were trans, and it was like, yeah, okay, cool, I'm happy for them. Cool. It wasn't a thing. Yeah. It was just like, okay, it's like finding out someone's going to get married or someone's going to have a baby or it was just like, okay, that's a nice bit of news for someone. Somebody's happy. And then suddenly, about 3 or 4 years ago, it became this, and there were people on Facebook, I remember, just post after post after post was just how much they hated trans people. And it was just from nowhere. It was just like, where did this come from? What do you think has changed in society in the last few years, where we seem to be becoming more and more tolerant, and then we just hit a brick wall.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, every civil rights movement has seen this kind of pattern where things get more and more tolerant and people start breaking through, and then they get more visible. And then it gets to the point where their visibility, where most people suddenly are aware of them. And then the backlash starts. And that's, that happened with what happened with women's suffrage, and it happened with the civil rights movements in the 60s for African Americans, and it happened for gay people in the UK. And now it's happening for trans people. And there was this kind of, I think it was a headline or an article or something that was called The Transgender Tipping Point, and I think that was around 2012. And the article was like, oh, this is the point where trans people are finally visible and they've finally got rights. And I think that was very true, in that it was the tipping point where suddenly we were visible, and that was also the tipping point when the anti-trans movement started. And now they've got this like really fine-tuned propaganda machine, which is, constantly generating outrage stuff, like whether it's just totally fabricated or based on truth, or even just some truth, because of course there are weird and bad trans people, like there are for anyone. And the internet allows you to have these like algorithmically generated, perfected to enrage you,
Yes.
Your timeline, and people get sucked into these things, because it's not just trans people. There are a few other of these kind of hate wells that people get sucked into, that things like Twitter are very good for making people, lose their brains to. But trans people are just one of them. And I think it's going to be hard. People have got to get bored of this. You're not going to be able to de-radicalize them with like information, because they didn't get to their points by rational thought, so they're not going to get out of them by rational thought. So,
well, we can hope that they do get bored. I'm just hoping for a change of guard in the next election, and we'll have a party in charge that is more accessible and is also more accountable. However, their response to what's happened this week has been so goddamn lackluster. And like, well, we welcome clarification. What? You welcome? What on earth? So what do you make of Labour's response? Like, what are they doing? What are they playing at?
Yeah. So I guess. So for anyone who doesn't know, basically the angle that the EHRC went for was, we want to clarify the Equalities Act. And that's bullshit, because it was very clear in the start. The issue is that it was clearly allowed trans people to have human rights, and now they want to change it so it clearly doesn't allow trans people to have human rights. But they've sold it as a clarification, and like Keir Starmer's response was, we welcome clarification, let's see what they come up with, which on a surface reading as a trans person is terrifying and enraging, because it sounds like he's saying, okay, yeah, cool, let's do it. And that's horrifying, because he's meant to be the opposition, and Labour is meant to be the party of civil rights and progress. And that very clearly isn't. In his defense, and I'm about to rant off on why he's bad for other reasons, but in his defense, obviously, as you said, Lee Anderson said, the Conservative Party had decided that culture war, attacking trans people's human rights and refugees' human rights, is a good political strategy. And if I was stepping back and being a neutral bystander, I'd say, well, it doesn't look like a good strategy, because it didn't work in the USA and it didn't work in Australia. However, they have decided that it is part of their strategy, and they're going all in on it. And the one response to that would be to go all in and take them head on in it and say, right, no, we're going to be the party of progress. But that lets them fight on their games in their terms, and they have the gutter press on their side. And it's very easy, when there's kind of an undercurrent of transphobia in society anyway, to sell the idea of a minority being terrible. Or the other alternative is to say, well, okay, you have your little whiny bullshit about trans people, while we make people's lives better during a cost of living crisis. So what Labour is going to do, you do what you want. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to make it so everyone has enough money so they can feed their children. And then hopefully when people come to the ballots, they could be like, well, either I vote for the party that's going to take human rights away from Katy Montgomerie, or I'm going to vote for the party which is going to allow my children to go to school and to be able to like eat at lunchtime. And hopefully that will be the decision people make. However, I mean, I do feel like that could be a strategy that works, but I do think that what the cost of that strategy, even if it's a winning strategy, has to be acknowledged that this is costing a lot of morale from the trans community and the LGBT community in general. And we're already on low supplies of that. People are fleeing the country. People are, considering all kinds of horrific options to deal with this or failing to deal with this. And it would be good even if Keir Starmer has to stick to the party line, if some of the other politicians could not go on call-in shows and agree with it, or could LGBT Labour, the group, could maybe make a statement or something.
That would be good. But
it would be something.
Thinking through the ramifications of this. So could we get to a point where a cis woman is sexually harassed in her place of work? She goes to a tribunal and they say, as their excuse, sorry, we thought you were trans. We wouldn't have been mean to you if we knew you were cis. Would that be a defence after this? I mean, it boggles the mind.
I think as the Equality Act stands today with no amendments, that wouldn't matter because they would say, oh, well, you thought that this person was a woman, even if you thought they were a trans woman, or even if you said you thought they were trans, they'd be like, oh, well, it's transphobia.
Yes.
But if they said, oh, I chose a specifically misogynistic insult, so I said like, oh, you pregnant bitch or something like that, you could say, oh, well, that couldn't have been a trans person, but I wouldn't say that against, what am I trying to say? If I said that against a trans woman, then obviously that wouldn't be true. I don't know. You could construct some bullshit thing where you said something misogynistic to someone who was a trans woman, and could they use that to defend? I don't know for sure, but I think looking at the letter of the EHRC and what they're clearly intending, the alternate situation where someone is misogynistic to someone they think is a cis woman, but then it turns out they're a trans woman, the EHRC is then saying, if it came out in court that this person was a trans woman, that would clear them. Because you would say, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Even if all your documents say F, even if they thought you were a cis woman, even if, everyone in their life thought they were a cis woman, maybe they'll call in as an expert witness some kid you went to school with when you were 6 years old, and they'll be like, oh, yeah, she used to be a boy. And they'll be like, well, in that case, the law that we've now newly created protects you, and it will let misogynists get off. I mean, so that is what they're intending. The case you said, I'm not sure. I mean, they would say, oh, we're not intending that, but they're so incompetent that may well be the result of it. Sure.
Yeah, I just want to say a big shout out to Miof Velocita, who has dropped a super chat of 20 Danish kroner into the pot, saying, "We love you, Katy." There you go.
Oh,
thank you, and thank you, Katy. Get some super chats in, but yeah, it's going back to going forward with this. So I'm a bit worried that one of my stepdaughters likes to have her hair short. She's only a young teenager. And I'm worried that she'll go into a female toilet and an older woman who's a bit, stronger and bigger than her, will tell her that she's not allowed to use that toilet because she assumes that she's not female, cisgender female. And that, honestly, it crushes my heart to think that could be something that would be seen as acceptable by society. And imagine just having that. I mean, obviously, you've had to put up with a lot of shit in your life. I couldn't even begin to imagine. But I'm thinking about someone who's gone through the menopause and they don't look as feminine as they used to. How soul crushing would it be to go into a public bathroom and have some woman say to you, you can't use this toilet. You have to show me your genitals before I let you use this toilet. What are you going to do? You either wet yourself or go to the men's, which is even more freaking dangerous for anyone.
Yeah.
It's just...
And these aren't hypotheticals. Unlike the what if a man gets a gender recognition certificate to something, which is a hypothetical, these are real life situations. I was talking just a couple of weeks ago before this news came out to a lady whose daughter is gender non-conforming. Just a normal cis girl who's 16 or something, but has short hair and chooses to look that way, and has been confronted going into women's toilets. And the last incident she had wasn't actually a woman confronting her, but was a man as she was going into the toilet was like, "Oi, where do you think you're going, mate?" And
my God,
that's terrifying.
That's opening the door to abuse. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
and like if you're a lone girl and some man comes up and confronts you like that, like what are you going to do? I mean, it's horrific. And also, and situations where like we can think of this situation where it's some, maybe it's just some genuinely concerned man but like also as well as things like that, you get a situation where a lone woman goes into the toilet and a group of drunk men at like 1 a.m. decide that's a bloke in a dress. And then they go and kick her head in. Like, I mean, that's also possible. The attitude that this creates, saying trans people shouldn't be allowed in spaces, is more than just a legal thing. Like the law
Yeah.
sets people's, sets the whole sort of society's tone. So yeah, it's grim, and I think you're right to be concerned about it. Not that I want to fearmonger, but yeah.
Well, there is, it's not just that this will affect trans people. This is going to affect everyone negatively. And and looking at what's happening in the States now, there's a state where they've just repealed. There was a court order to stop it from happening. That's been repealed now. About checking the genitals of children. Trigger warning, sorry, I should say before I say this, but like to allow them to compete in athletics. That's child abuse. That is,
and not only is this child abuse, and not only does it benefit no one, but can actually be weaponized. Like if you're the popular girl at school, no one's going to challenge you. But if some ugly girl starts doing better at running than you, you can just be like, she's a man. And she's not going to want to submit to genital. No teenage girl wants to show her genitals to some fucking weirdo PE teacher. Well, so she'll just stop running.
Yes.
And then she's not gonna pick that as a career. She's not gonna beat this popular girl, and then that's the end of that, isn't it? I mean, it's like a social weapon,
crushing dreams one at a time.
Yeah,
and just taking people's freedom away from them for no reason whatsoever. We've had our freedom of movement taken off us. They're trying to take our freedom to protest. They're trying to take our freedom to strike as well, and just our freedom to use the freaking toilet. Because, and then there's obviously the parallel. If we go back even further than the 80s, the parallel with the 1950s. Why did white people not want black people using their bathroom in America?
Yeah.
Oh, they might commit crimes. We don't want them in the same. They're not the same as us. And I don't see any difference. So when I think of someone saying, "Oh, we should have monitors checking all the bathrooms," where are you going to go to with this? Are you going to have people in restaurants like stationed to make sure that people use the right bathroom? And then you've got people.
I mean, that would be a job-creating policy. So maybe that's the act we get. We
bog
need to
trolls. Do you want to be a bog troll?
Stimulate the economy, because you'll have to hire, like, how many public toilets are there in the UK? 10 million?
Yeah, something like that.
It's a lot of new jobs. Genital inspector. You could put that on your CV.
But I mean, yeah. So it's from the other side, as someone who's cis and male. It just beggars belief that this is happening, and I feel like a mixture of just shame that people are doing this. I feel really. I feel pity for people who are having to put up with this shit. But also I want to know like how to be a good ally, because there was a time when like I didn't really go into this argument, because whenever I tried to go anywhere near it, people would say, "Oh, you're a cisgender man, Graham. You can't talk about this issue." Fuck off. Do you know what I mean? And it was like, okay, I better not say anything. And a few years ago, I did a pubcast with my friend Jessie, who's a transgender woman, and my friend Alex, who's non-binary. And both of them said, no, make a noise, help us. Don't just sit on the sidelines and let this happen. So since then, I've been a lot more vocal. And to be honest with you, I haven't lost any friends over this. No one I really knew in real life who was a good mate. It's always been just randoms on the internet, really.
Yeah, I mean, I understand people's worry. Like, if you're a cis person and you're like, "Oh, but I might say the wrong thing and people might shout at me." Yeah, you might, and that might happen. But no one knows everything from day one, and the best way to learn is to make mistakes. And if you say something and someone's like, "Actually, that's kind of wrong," or "That's kind of offensive," or whatever, you can be like, "Oh, you know what? I didn't know, sorry." And if they still have a go at you and they're like, "Oh, you're a disgusting person, you're a Nazi, you're shit," just be like, "Well, this person's an idiot." Like any normal, as trans people, we deal with this stuff all the time. And I know straight away, sometimes you meet this person who will like, they'll call trans people slurs and stuff, but they won't realize it's bad, and they'll be like, yeah, I'll support trannies, yeah, whatever. And they're like, they also, to those people, you can just be like, mate, just so you know, that word isn't great, but thanks for the support. And you can just correct people and they can get better. And I think don't be afraid to make some mistakes is my main advice. As long as you're ready to listen and you're ready to be like, oh shit, yeah, okay, but I didn't know, I'm sorry, then that's all you can be. Like, that's the best you can be. And that's like, it's the same with me for stuff like race. I'm a white person. That means I'm going to come out with some clumsy bullshit about race sometimes. And that means that, people who aren't white, they are, telling me to stop being shit about some things. And the best I could ever do is say, I'm sorry, I'm listening now, correct me, and then I will do better in future. So yeah, it's good that people are stepping up. We do need cis people because there aren't many trans people. So
as Pumps has just said in the chat, it's the same with racism. If you say something wrong and someone points it out, you can learn, which is so true. And it's something that I'd say a lot on my channel is you don't know stuff till someone points it out. A lot of the time, especially growing up in the kind of world that we grow up in, where we're fed information from quite unreliable sources a lot of the time, being picked up on stuff, I think, is really, really important. But like I say, when I was in school, racial slurs, you really couldn't get away with that. But I mean, anything homophobic, it was kind of like anything goes, which I look back on my school career now and I absolutely cringe, because that's all I knew at the time. And growing up, you grow up and you're like, bloody hell, why did I ever think that kind of attitude was acceptable? Even as a kid, I saw myself as a gay ally, as someone who's friends with gay people and didn't have a problem with it. But it didn't occur to me that, saying something was gay when it wasn't, it was just a bit rubbish, might have had a psychological effect on someone, a negative effect on someone. So,
it's amazing how easy it can be to not consider something so obvious. Like, of course, using gay as an insult is terrible, but like, I was the same. Growing up, I was transphobic and homophobic for 16 years of my life. And when you're 5, you can be excused, but a 16-year-old can rationalize that. And often you explain it to them and they're like, oh yeah. And that's it. That's all they need. But they're taught, society indoctrinates people into being bigoted. So they just need to learn.
So did you grow up in a kind of environment where transphobia was just the norm?
Well, my most popular YouTube video ever is called "I'm a Trans Woman and I Used to Be Transphobic." So go check it out after you've watched this amazing video.
Everyone else should watch it.
Yeah. So I guess there wasn't really much talk of trans people. The only thing I knew about trans people was that they were disgusting, bad, all sex workers, all perverts and losers, and they didn't have any friends or family, which is obviously all false. But when you're like 7 and that's what someone tells you or you see on popular media, then I just absorbed that as being true. But homophobia was much more explicit. Saying someone was gay was an insult. Implying that like 2 boys kissed or 2 girls kissed was, really an insult and a weapon to use against people. And it was rare that anyone said, "Oh, you're a trans person." But I got called a girl as an insult, obviously, and I guess that's similar, but that's also kind of a type of misogyny as well, implying that women are inferior. So it is complicated, but I think that homophobia is really explicit and the transphobia was just more, implicit, I guess.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it seems to me that when people are picking on trans people, it's like you're literally picking on a minority of a minority. There's so few people in society who are trans. And then you got the idiots going, oh, there's more trans people now than ever before. And you're like, yeah, there were more left-handed people than ever before in the 80s when you were finally allowed to write with your left hand. And then it leveled at about 10%. And the same thing has happened with gay people. And the same thing will happen, I assume, with transgender people. But just to go back to, we were talking about...
No, you assume wrong. One day everyone is going to be trans. That's the trans agenda.
Oh, does that mean I have to shave my beard? I can't be bothered shaving my beard. I'm too lazy. But yeah, no. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, we mentioned Keir Starmer and something that he said that wound me up. I'm no fan. I'm no massive fan of Keir Starmer. I've got to say this. He said if he was if one of his children was trans, he would want to know. And this was about the fact that schools should report if a boy or a girl has decided that they want to be seen as the other gender in school. Now, there was a story on the radio the other day which really just upset me quite a lot, which was about a little girl, and she was in school, she was a teenager, and she was caught kissing another girl behind the bike sheds or whatever. And she said she begged them not to tell her parents, to say, look, she was just kissing someone, not to say that it was another girl. And the school said, no, we have to tell you, we have to tell your parents. And she came into school the next day with a black eye.
Yeah.
And I hear stories like that, and I'm like, there is a duty of care to the child, not to the parents. If a child says, don't tell my parents because they might hit me, your primary duty of care is to the child. And denying children the ability to express themselves in the way that they want to in a safe environment is disgusting, but also denying children the chance to, when a lot of the TERFs go crazy about trans people and they start talking about protecting the children, we've got to protect the children. One of the big ones is banning puberty blockers with children, and you just like, what's the problem with this? But it's irreversible. It's not, is it? It's a reversible process if the child changes their mind. But one of the things that I've read, and you could probably correct me on this if it's wrong, but the amount of people who regret having surgery, like elective surgery for their hip replacement or whatever, is like it's sky high. It's like 20% or something, and the number of people who regret having gender realignment surgery is way down. Really, it's like less than 1%. Is this right? Am I just
on that? I'm not on that last thing. Studies, when you're measuring regret of any medical procedure, it's kind of hard to measure what regret is, because it could be anything from, oh my God, what have I done? I've ruined my life, to just something like, I had a hip replacement and it's not really made anything better and it just cost me a load of money, so I kind of regret it. Or like, I still have a lot of pain, something like that. But that means you get a range of numbers. And the range of numbers for regret for hip replacement or knee replacement is something like 5 to 30%. And for trans people having surgery, it's something like 0.2 to 1%. So in some cases, depending on how you define it, it could literally be 100 times more people regret knee surgery or hip replacement than they do
100 times more.
Genital. Yeah. Which is 100, 2 orders of magnitude more, which is just, it's so crazy. But just to go back onto your point about this Keir Starmer thing, where he was saying about, I want to know, if you're the kind of person and you think, you know what, if my kid was LGBT, I'd want to know. Do you know how you can do that? You can make it clear to them that if they're LGBT, you would accept them and love them for who they are. Then they will come out to you. Well, like if you're having to get the school to forcibly out them to you when they have chosen not to tell you, sure, you will find out. But that doesn't mean that you've done a good job of parenting. It means you've made it clear to them that their teacher is more accepting of them than you are. And I think that's a sign on its own of a failing. Even if we ignore child abuse, that's just saying, well, you should have done better at being a parent. And I'm not judging parents. It's difficult raising a kid and maybe it's hard to be clear, but you can just sit a kid down when they're like 10. They're old enough to understand what LGBT means, but maybe not old enough to totally be aware of it, of whether they are it or not yet. And just be like, you know what? Some people are LGBT, and if you're that, that's fine. And if you're not, that's fine. And I love you regardless. And then they'll probably be like, you know what? When my mum or dad said me this thing, it made it clear that I was able to come out to them and I'll tell them. So, but yeah, like obviously some people are child abusers and some of those child abusers have children. And if any policy you're writing for anything, especially schools, doesn't take into account the fact that some parents are child abusers, then you have failed. Your policy is already bad from the start. And particularly LGBT kids. LGBT kids are more likely to be abused by their parents. Yeah. So that is absolutely something you have to factor in as like thing number one when discussing policies for LGBT kids. It's just, just Keir Starmer has done lots of these things. Another one that he did was when they were talking about the gender recognition certificate, and Scotland proposed lowering the age to 16. So currently it's 18 in the UK when you can get one, though no one in practice can get one at 18. It's actually impossible. But in theory, you can get one at 18.
Is that because the process takes so long?
Yeah, the process just fucking ridiculous. I mean, I only got my gender recognition certificate last year, and I came out like nearly a decade ago.
Yeah.
So the process is ridiculous. But anyway, and he was like, "Oh, I don't think 16-year-olds should have it," with no justification for that ridiculous claim. But then, like days later, we had the horrific murder of Brianna J, who was a 16-year-old trans girl who was murdered by her peers at school, and we'd started a campaign to be like, she should have a gender recognition certificate so that she has like dignity in death, and so that her family, who's loved and supported her for who she was, wouldn't have to deal with the horror of, every single thing misgendering her and having the wrong name and all this kind of other stuff. And Keir Starmer, having only days earlier given a disgusting opinion on us, he could have said, you know what, maybe even if you're like, oh, I don't think living 16-year-olds can have them, giving a gender recognition certificate to someone who's no longer alive doesn't affect anyone apart from their families. And if you believe in life after death, perhaps them. But there's just nothing from him. Like days apart, it's such a major incident.
Yeah.
It's national news. I just think he's been very. No, I don't even think I could say he's been clumsy. I think he's been actively transphobic. Not to Rishi Sunak levels, but he's been below 0 out of 10 in terms of being a trans ally.
Yeah, it's not, and he could do so much better. And also, is it Rosie Duffield who's still in the Tory Labour Party, and she hasn't had the whip withdrawn, even though she's made some pretty horrific transphobic comments. Now,
just to be clear on that, just before Wids goes on, because I think people often miss the point on Rosie Duffield. She's made comments that someone might consider transphobic. I'm being as legally sensible as I can be in saying that, but she has also spoken at like hate groups events who have openly campaigned to remove all trans people's rights, like more than one.
Oh, wow.
Like anti-trans hate group. The other day, she was liking a joke from Graham Linehan, which, at least in my opinion, the premise of the joke was that the Nazis didn't kill trans people. And that's just so horrific. Like, the Labour Party has expelled people over things like that before. But because it's also over trans issues, they're not even going to comment on it. So it's more like lots of people say transphobic comments. It is almost standard for politicians to say transphobic comments, but she is levels above that in terms of the stuff that she is involved in. She's constantly promoting and campaigning with people who are just openly calling to removal of our human rights. So why is that allowed in Labour? Anyway, sorry, carry on with your next point. I just wanted to
I'm agreeing with you. I mean, I had quite a shocking meeting last year where I was talking to someone who seemed all right, and very much on side for things that social issues and things like that. And then they just came out with some really, really, really horrific transphobia. And I was just like, where's this coming from? Like, what? And it was shocking because you expect it from the right. You expect it from that lot because they just hate everyone. And every day they wake up with a new minority to hate. But when it's someone who's in your own group and you think, I thought we were quite aligned on this. But I feel like the discourse has become so toxic. And I think this is why, we could argue a little bit cowardly. Keir Starmer has just shied away from it, and whenever it's brought up, he sort of just goes, I don't want to talk about this. Let's talk about something else. Which, in a way, like you said earlier, yeah, good, fine. Let's not talk about it because it shouldn't be an issue. It should just be trans people exist, live with it, deal with it. But let's talk about the economy or something. But at the same time, for a lot of people, it's just it's kind of snuffing out the light at the end of the tunnel. It's like, okay, this is going to get better at some point when we get the Tories out of office. Surely it'll get better. But how are you looking at it now? Are you a bit hopeful of the future, or are you kind of feeling a bit despondent right now?
I think that this EHRC thing is looming over me so much that I can't see the future. Like it's completely clouded whether I feel like I even have a future in this country at all. But a couple of weeks ago, with the latest Rosie Duffield nonsense and the latest Keir Starmer nonsense, I felt like, what is the difference between these two parties? If I always hoped the Labour would progress trans rights, but now I'm thinking, are they going to carry on taking trans rights away? If they manage to do this EHRC thing in the next year before the general election, are Labour going to just be like, oh, well, we're not changing that now. What's done is done. Or even if it's set up and they're already having the parliamentary debate stuff, are they just going to be like, oh, okay, well, we'll finish the job? But I don't know. I don't have faith in the current Labour leadership to not do the wrong thing on trans issues. I do have faith in many of the Labour Party members and MPs and other people involved in the party. There are some amazing people. There are some really good LGBT allies and LGBT people at every level of the party, or almost to the top, who I know are doing good things. And I'm hoping that when Keir Starmer gets in power, which he probably will, unless he has some major scandal, I hope that he's just like, right, I don't know anything about LGBT issues. I don't care. I'm going to put a gay woman in charge or something. And then she'll just do it all, or, whoever. Ideally, it'd be great if they put a trans person in charge, but that's not going to happen. But, if they get in some, they could replace all of the people in the EHRC, or they could disband the EHRC, as it's obviously a failed institution now. And then they could get some lawyers back in.
The whole point was set up for equalities and human rights, and the Tories have poisoned it. They've poisoned the well by putting their person in. And Kemi Badenoch is like, oh, I just hate everyone. This is the woman who didn't want to give special dispensation in work to women who are going through menopause. That's just, and her attitude was like, well, you may as well give special dispensation for people with ginger hair. Ha 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 ha. And I was, as a ginger, I was watching that going, you what? What is wrong? What is wrong with her? Like, seriously, it's painful. It's painful to watch.
And not only is she openly anti-feminist and anti-women's rights, she's being hailed as a defender of women because she hates trans people.
Yes.
In what world? The gender critical movement has been an absolute gift to misogynists, because they can be like, I want to ban abortion. I don't think we should have domestic violence shelters. Women who are pregnant shouldn't be working anyway. They should be at home in the kitchen. And then everyone's like, hey, aren't you a misogynist? And you'd be like, oh, no, because I know what a woman is. And trans women are men. And then they're like, oh, defender of women. Oh, that's so good. Oh, fighting for women's rights. And then just all of a sudden you're at the center of a women's rights campaign.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of the people at the head of this stuff are, openly anti-feminist shitheads. Like this latest EHRC thing, obviously it's the EHRC themselves, but lots of gender critical groups have been very involved in it. And one that has been sort of taking some of the credit for it is Sex Matters. And Sex Matters have had this campaign, #RespectMySex, and there's all kind of in the weeds of gender critical a bit, but one of the sort of three most prominent people leading that campaign was a lady who it writes for conservative women or Christian conservatives and all these kind of things. And she has written an article called "The Gender Pay Gap Should Be Bigger." And she's like,
what?
Yes, no,
what? Literally. Oh my God.
Search it up. Anyone doesn't believe me, Caroline Fisk with 2 Fs. The gender pay gap should be bigger. And she's literally arguing for, her argument is, as Christian women, we should be at home and we shouldn't be chasing salaries anyway. And a bigger gender pay gap shows traditional family values are better, working and stuff. Straight up, that's her argument. And then 6 months later or whatever, some time later, she's at the head of a campaign and the Daily Mail says, are these the new suffragettes? And I'm like, what, a lady who thinks that women shouldn't have jobs? What are you talking about? How is this? I mean, obviously it's the Daily Mail and it's Sex Matters, so it's anti-feminist bullshit anyway, but this presentation they have, and the media's all just going along with it, they are women's rights campaign. It's fuck off, are they? It's just infuriating.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But again, you're saying, I mean, the gender critical movement has set the movement of feminism back 50 years.
Oh yeah,
I can't.
it's
I can't get past that. I feel like screaming. You're making life worse for women. Full stop. That's all they're doing. I'm making it better for men who mean women harm, which is horrific and heartbreaking in equal measure.
I put the link in the chat. What we need is a bigger gender pay gap by Caroline Fisk.
Oh my god. That's painful. That's painful, Katie. But yeah, I mean, with the hijacking of because this is why I don't like using the word TERF, because I don't think that they're feminists. I think that they're actually misogynists. So maybe they should be terms or something. A trans-exclusionary radical misogynist. But like, it is the go-to term now to describe a group of people who are just obsessed with trans people in a way that isn't it's really not healthy. It's interesting that you say this was something I think Jess said when I was interviewing her a couple of years ago. She said, I don't think of trans people as much, and I'm trans.
Yeah. So I know, and it's true. It's true. Like I'm hopelessly addicted to Twitter, and obviously I spend most of my Twitter time campaigning for trans rights. But at the most, that's like some hours of my day. If with my like friends and family, I don't talk about it at all. I have hobbies. I'm in a band. I like go out and watch live music. I go to the pub and talk with my friends. In the summer, I go to the park every single day and have a barbecue. And none of these fucking gender critical weirdos have any of this going on. Their whole life is this. It's just insane, yeah.
And it's also, I mean, going back to what we said earlier about this idea that no group should be presumed innocent, which is just one of those horrific things you can say about any minority or cohort. But here's the thought experiment. It's like, okay, let's say I'm a bad man and I want to do things to women that are against the law. At the moment, after this review of the Met, it came out that the expression that was used, and again, trigger warning for people watching this, that rape had been effectively decriminalised in London because the cases going to court was so low. It was about 1%. So if you rape someone, especially if you go out on a date with them on Tinder or something, you have a 99 times out of 100 chance of getting away with it scot-free. So why would anyone in their right mind go through the hell of changing their gender as it is at the moment? Just the bureaucracy of it to go and get into women's toilets when the queue for the women's toilets is always dead long and it's never long for the men's toilet. Why would anyone do that?
It doesn't. Not only does it not benefit you and it doesn't make any sense, but it disadvantages you. If you are some fucking loser creep who like gets their dick out on the bus in front of women, almost 100% of the time, you will have faced no consequences for that at all. If you're a trans woman that does it, you'll probably be the Fox News story of the day. You'll be internationally blasted over everything. Everyone will know you by your first name, and people will be replying to random tweets of mine where I'm talking about guitar or Pokemon cards or cooking or something, saying, why haven't you commented on this person who just wanked off on a bus in North Carolina? Like, because I don't know who the fuck they are. Like, what are you talking about? But like, yeah, it's such a ridiculous thing. Like, if you want to have, if you're a bad person, if you're a disgusting man who wants to, exploit women and rape them, then become a police officer or pretend to be one, because then you will get away with it, and then you will have actual like social protection. Being a trans person just makes you more of a target. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And yeah, we've come to a point where it's 2023, and honestly, I thought that we were going in the right direction. We had civil partnerships from when I was about 20, I think, when they came in, and then we've had gay marriage come in, or marriage equality, as I should call it. And yeah, this just seems to just be dragging us back to a horrible time in our history. And when I think of the Union Jack, for instance, or the Union flag, to be technical, I think it embarrasses me because it's been hijacked by the BNP, by the Nazis who wanted to use it to further their own evil agenda. And then in the same way, in 2012 when Mo Farah won the marathon, not the marathon, the 500 and 1,000 meters in the Olympics, and he had this is a Somalian refugee with the Union Jack on his back, and I thought, bloody hell, things are changing, things are getting better, because now we're reclaiming the flag for people who aren't horrible. And I feel like feminism has got so far to go. You've got the overturning of Roe versus Wade in America, which has led to abortion being effectively banned in a couple dozen American states. Mm-hmm. You've got women's rights being curtailed all over the world. You've got the Taliban taking back over in Afghanistan. You've got trigger warning again. I'm sorry, I'm going to see lots of trigger warnings in this. People using rape as a weapon of war right now in Ukraine, which is happening. And to fixate in this way on transgender people and what bathroom they use is just, it's sickening and it's disheartening, and I want to have some hope for the future. I want things to get better. Do you think that the younger generation coming up is going to have the will and the power to achieve the dream of just everyone just being left to do what they want as long as they're not hurting anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I always like to tell trans people is this might seem bleak. Like, in a sense, this is the most hatred trans people have ever faced. Because in the past, people hated us, but they didn't really talk about us. But if we look at what the people who were fighting for their rights then achieved, like the people like April Ashley, who fought for trans rights in the 60s, when she grew up, there was no trans people at all. Like, literally, she did everything on her own. And she still managed to gain us some trans rights. And then the people who stood on her shoulders, who grew up in the 80s, they managed, like Caroline Cozy, they managed to get some more rights. And now the people who grew up in the 90s and 2000s, like me, are standing on their shoulders. And I was able to look back and see the people who came before me. And that's meant that I'm like on your show, I'm going on the news, I'm like sometimes on, all these like bigger things, just sometimes. And there are people like Laverne Cox who are on like internationally acclaimed TV series and stuff. But still we face a load of hardships, but the kids, the generation below us, they have all of our shoulders to stand on. And like, if we've achieved this much with nothing, they're going to achieve so much with the things they do have. And they have more to go up against in one sense, but in another sense, never before have trans people had so much support. So I think that the current trans panic will last another 10 years, because looking at moral panics, they seem to last about 20 years. And we are like
another 10 years of this.
10-ish years into it. It'll have a longer tail. I do think we're maybe approaching the peak, but I don't think we're there yet. Maybe in the UK, I don't know, but globally we're not there yet.
Yeah, indeed.
But I think we are at a position where at least in the UK, most people don't care if you're gay or straight, and that is such a big change from the 70s and 80s, and that is a single person's lifetime. So I hope that maybe when I'm 70, most people are like, oh, no one cares if you're trans. And that'll be...
That'll be perfection. I remember seeing, it was probably about 10 years ago now, but it was the British Attitude Survey that they take, I think, every year. And in the 80s, it was only 10% of respondents said there was nothing wrong with being gay. And by the 2010s, that had gone up to 90% of people said there's nothing wrong with being gay. So that you're right, it's happened in my lifetime. So yeah, it's just, this is another, and there was a point that we're going to wrap up in a moment, but there was a point that I think James O'Brien made a while ago where he said you can't think that anything's done. You can't think that anything's like sorted. Oh, we've got gay marriage now, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. You've got to keep fighting for the right of people to be able to do what they want with their own bodies.
Well, that is important to point out, is that, this attack on trans people isn't just in isolation. It's more obvious in places like America, but it's also true here. When they attack trans people's rights, the next thing they do is attack gay people's rights, and then they attack women's rights. Like, it's all the same force, and it's largely the same people doing it, and it gives them momentum. And maybe you've just watched this whole discussion and thought, I just still don't give a fuck about trans people. maybe you give a fuck about gay people, or maybe you know a woman, and maybe that's enough for you to realize that this taking away people's rights is a very slippery slope.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, I'll let you have the last word on that. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Katy. It's been a really positive experience speaking to you, and I really hope that this whole Equalities and Human Rights Commission thing just dies very, very swiftly. I'll be back tomorrow at 9:30 for Morning Brew. I'll just say thank you to all of our wonderful contributors, people who have added to the chat. Not everyone who added to the chat. I've had to block a couple of people, but everyone else has been fantastic. And thanks for the super chats as well. Thanks for them, and really appreciate it. Big shout out to my patrons and everyone who is a YouTube member. The LabSoc, the Labour Social Patreon has gone live tonight, so if you head over to patreon.com/Labour Social, you'll be able to become a Labour Social patron, and there's lots of tiers and things. If you're already one of my patrons, don't worry about it. You're going to get top tier access anyway for sticking with me when my content wasn't that interesting. Okay. So thanks very much, Katy, and until next time, I'll say hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye.